How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree? Travel the world and the seven seas. Everybody's looking for something. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to get used by you. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to be out you.
And lastly, we ask that there be no recording or streaming of today's sessions from the floor. And any disruptive behavior in today's session will result in being removed from the call.
We please ask that there will be no recording or streaming of today's sessions from the floor. Any disruptive behavior today could result in being removed from the call. So, just be a nice person. So with the little housekeeping things out of the way, let's jump right in.
Again, we ask no recording or streaming of today's session.
We ask that there be no recording or streaming of today's session from the floor. Any disruptive behavior in today's session will result in being removed from the call.
Won't anybody help us? What are we running for? When there's nowhere we can run to anymore. We can't afford to be innocent. Stand up and face the enemy. It's a do or die situation. We will be invincible. And with the power of conviction, there is no sacrifice. It's a do or die situation. We will be invincible.
Who the fuck is Karlyn? She's just some sweet lady. She's like in a knitting. She does like a knitting stream. She's like a knitting YouTuber. She does knitting.
Can we grow up a little bit and
Alt
not
Girl
be
sent $200.
retarded?
Have you
Please.
seen the work of Karlyn Borysenko? Anti-commie cult leader and is obsessed with looking at what actual far-left communists are talking about and organizing today, infiltrating them. They infiltrated the universities, schools, media. She has the receipts to back it up. Primary source evidence. Infestation is dire and she calls Republicans idiots eating slop. Agree.
Thank you for the big super chat. Yeah, oh, I know Karlyn B. She's solid. She's funny. I
The
like
great
her.
noticer sent $200.
Literally.
So
not
it's,
Ian.
it's not because
Yeah.
I haven't dangled my junk into the combat zone on purpose to get some camera footage, but that's the big part of what's the
Is
problem.
that what you call reporting?
Go
and live
under, if
streaming?
you're going to do it,
Yeah,
go
seriously.
undercover. Otherwise you're wearing a hunk of meat in a lion's den. Nick Shirley, I love you. Take care of yourself, man. Karlyn Borysenko went undercover. Do stuff like that. Like if you want to expose this thing, don't pariah,
But
please.
Ian, here's and I agree with you to an extent.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Rum links, zwei, drei, rum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein Genialwalter einmeinst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein Genialwalter einmeinst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich mein Genialwalter einmeinst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Thursday, apparently. Because sometimes socialists go live on the internet, and sometimes it just makes sense to do a watch party. Sometimes when socialism is happening live right in front of us, we may as well get up early, even though, like, listen, I know it's not early for normal people, but I stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning, okay? So, like, so this is, I just want credit. I want credit. I want credit for being an adult that got my ass out of bed. I didn't want to. This is early, okay? I worked until 4 in the morning. I didn't go to sleep until 5. I am up early, even though it's almost 1 in the afternoon for you guys. Okay, these are the sacrifices I make when there is a socialism live stream on the internet. This is what I put myself through for all of you, and I hope you're all grateful for my extreme sacrifice of having to get my ass out of bed before noon just to watch socialism with you guys, because you know, the Historical Materialism channel is a channel that I know about. This channel, I think we've watched a couple of things from this channel, And well, you know what? The first thing I'm going to say, Ron, is try to restrict your questions to things that are actually relevant to what we're talking about, because it is extremely fucking rude. It is extremely fucking rude to walk into someone's classroom and they're trying to teach a class here and you're like, excuse me, can I ask this retard question that has literally no relevance to anything going on right now? That's rude. Don't do that. I have to listen. Can we be? Can we like? We got a little extra time, so let me just say this. I have to retrain an entire audience about how to act appropriately in educational situations. Like, I mean, for real though. I am hosting an open air classroom on the internet, and and anyone can show up to my classroom, and I literally have to retrain my audience about how to act appropriately in educational environments. It's like, should they have learned this in school? Yup, they should have. Could we make the argument that it might not be their fault that they didn't learn it in school? No, of course not. It's the fault of the teachers. It's also the fault of their parents for not bringing them up correctly. But like, when you walk into someone's classroom, you behave in a certain way, and you are in my classroom. This might be on the internet, it might be on YouTube, so people might be confused about that, but you're in my classroom right now, and you follow my fucking rules. I'm just saying. And speaking of which, we do have to talk about some rules, because today we are going to be watching a live stream on another YouTube channel and doing a live reaction to it. And of course, one of the reasons that we're watching this is because it does feature our goddess, the internet love of my life. No one ever holds a candle to Sophie. No one. I might turn lesbian for Sophie, even though I'm terrified of the idea of eating pussy. I never want to do that. I think it's like, just like, I don't even want to talk about it. Okay, I don't even want to talk about it. But for Sophie, I might turn myself into a lesbian. And Sophie, I'm pretty sure, is in a polyamorous relationship with both a man and a woman. So I think that might work out okay. Sophie is an Aries, just like me. Sophie is our abolish the family goddess. She has written multiple books about abolishing the family. I consider myself to be a Sophie aficionado. I have watched almost every single video that I can find of Sophie on the internet. Yeah, I could just join Sophie's polycule. Sophie pretends not to like me, but she does. She does. I know in my heart of hearts that Sophie has to pretend not to like me because she's a socialist and she doesn't want people to think we are in solidarity. But I know she does. I know that Sophie has some sort of appreciation for me because she unblocked me on Twitter that time when I asked her to. I'm just saying. Anyway, so Sophie has a book. Actually, I use Sophie's book every single day to hold up my microphone. Someone got me a signed copy of Sophie's book. They actually went to a Sophie book signing and got it signed to me, which was really great. Shout out Average Person. And now I use it to hold up my microphone because I haven't fixed my other microphone yet because it's been sitting on my floor for a month and a half. Sophie's book is about how you can't really be a feminist unless you're an anti-capitalist. So everyone who considers themselves to be a feminist that is not an anti-capitalist, Sophie calls that an enemy feminism. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be the same basic gist of this channel. We've got Emma Heaney on this channel, who Reagan really likes. We've got a couple other people who I've never heard of on this one. I'm pretty sure this is going to be about how if you are not a trans, Marxist, anti-assimilationist, anti-capitalist, then you are not a real feminist. I think that's what this is going to be about. Let's read the description here. Make it bigger so I can actually see it. Oh, God! Now it's too big. Where did it go? There it is. Got it. Feminism Against Cisness showcases the future of feminist, historical, theoretical, and political thought freed from the conceptual strictures of cisness. The fallacy that assigns sex determines sexed experience. The essays demonstrate that this fallacy hinges on the enforcement of white and bourgeois standards of gender comportment that naturalize brutalizing, race and class hierarchies. This is so Sophie. This is so Sophie. I can barely stand it. This is so Sophie. It is therefore no accident that the social processes making cisness compulsory are also implicated in anti-blackness, misogyny, indigenous erasure, xenophobia, and bourgeois antipathy for working class life. Working from trans historical archives and materialist trans feminist theories, this volume demonstrates the violent work that cis ideology has done and thinks towards a future for feminism beyond this ideology's counter-revolutionary pull. Yep. Okay. Ooh, Sophie has another book coming out, Femphilia. That'll be nice. That'll be nice. She also, look at this. Sophie got Penguin Random House to publish a book on the liberation of children. That's going to be great. We're really looking forward to Sophie's book tour about the liberation of children. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that. So we are watching this live. Now, listen, I'm very, very serious about this. We are doing a live watch party. We may show up in their chat to ask some questions. But I need to really emphasize this, okay? I'm about to give a 7-minute lecture because we have about 7 minutes before this begins. I'm going to give a little bit of a lecture to the people in the chat right now over here, all right? I don't want any shit posting in their chat. I don't want any heckling. I don't want any nonsense. I don't want any bullshit. I don't want any retardation. I don't want anyone going over there and going, you don't even know what a woman is. I don't want anyone going over there and going, why don't you all move to Venezuela? I don't want anyone going over there going, why are you engaging in capitalism if you're... I don't want any of that fucking retard owning the libs fucking bullshit. I disavow all of it. What we do in this, when we're watching these live streams, is we have the opportunity to get them to answer well thought out, well-constructed questions. And then we get them on video answering those questions so that we can then take that footage and use it in perpetuity forever to show people what these people actually believe. If you are not over there to ask a very well thought out, very well constructed question that is relevant to what they are talking about, that we can use, I don't want to see you in their chat. And I'm going to have the chat on the screen and I'm going to know. And if anyone defies my wishes, because you are all representing me when you go over there, if you are in my chat and you are active in my chat and you go over there and act like an unhinged fucking retard, you are representing me. And this shit can blow back on me, and people can make the argument to get my fucking channel taken down, which they have absolutely tried to do on more than one occasion. And I'm not going to allow that just because you want to be an asshole on the internet. If you defy my wishes and you go over and you misrepresent me, then I will permanently ban you in my chat and excommunicate you from my community for fucking ever. I am being extremely clear about this. If you don't know what to say, then the good rule of thumb is going to be don't say anything at all. There will probably be times during this presentation when we're watching it that I say to people in my chat, can someone go over there and ask this question in the chat? And there is no way that they're ever going to answer our questions if people are going over there and acting like fucking retards. Okay? When the retards go over there, they ruin it for everyone. They literally ruin it for everyone. They ruin our ability to get questions answered. They ruin our ability to be able to do stuff like this. And I've had a couple incidences like this where I've tried to do these live streams recently and it has been fucked up by people in my own chat who are just acting like unhinged retards because they're not listening to the specific instructions that I am giving you. Our goal is to ask questions that they answer on video. If you go over there and you cause problems, You are impeding our ability to get them saying stuff on video, and that is getting in the way of me doing my work and exposing the left, and I won't fucking have that. If you are going over there and causing problems, you are basically playing for their fucking team, and you can get the fuck out, and you are no longer welcome here. Okay? And the reason I have to be so severe about this is the last time we tried to do this, a bunch of unhinged retards from my chat fucked it up for everyone else. And that wasn't cool because they didn't listen to the very specific instructions that I gave them at the beginning of the stream. I do not want to have to take this stuff behind a paywall. I really, really don't. There have been times when we have been able to behave like civilized people on the internet and just watch what other people are saying and ask good questions. That has been a reality that we have experienced, and I want to get back to that reality. And so I need everyone to do a 1 in the chat if you agree to my rules, and I want you to do a 2 in the chat if you do not agree to my rules. And if you don't agree, then there'll probably be consequences for that. I don't think you're going to be around the chat very much longer, but I want to see a 1 in the chat if you agree to my rules. Well, then those people, you know what, Ron? You want to know what? You want to know what? You know, Karlyn, not everyone is going to be here from the beginning of the stream. Well, you know what? Then those people are not smart enough to be in my community, Ron. You are not making a great first impression. I'll tell you that. You've already disrupted my class once. Now you're defending absolute retardation. Ron, do you belong here? Are you fucking smart enough to be here? I'm starting to think no. I'm starting to think no. Okay? There may be a time at the end of the stream where I instruct people to go over to their chat and to do something. But until then, rein it the fuck in. That's all that I'm asking. I don't think I'm asking too fucking much. Yeah, like if you're walking into my stream and you don't know what's going on, then why would the first thought in your head be, "Oh, let's go and fuck around. Let's go and behave. Let's go own the libs, bro." If your inclination is to own the libs, you're not smart enough to be on my fucking channel. See, we've already got someone over there. There's already got someone over there that's watching right now. And this is a person that probably hate watches every single stream that I do. And so none of that bullshit. None of that bullshit. And if that person is here, they're going to get banned. I'm telling you right now. Let me see. No, not here. Already got an idiot. Already got a retard. Already got a retard. Guys, the stream should be getting started in about 2 minutes. I just want to remind people, if you are not yet subscribed to my Substack, hey, thanks, Doug, for the class dues. I really do appreciate it. I just want to remind people, if you're not yet subscribed to my Substack, that is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I'm getting the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club back up and running. The Counter-Revolutionary Book Club is a podcast. You can find it on Apple and Spotify, where we read far-left documents. So last night, I uploaded 2 new episodes. We did the Be Gay, Do Terrorism episode, which is a little bit older, but I uploaded the full episode to the podcast so people can find it there. Also, that essay we read yesterday, How Liberal Identity Politics Paved the Way for Fascism. Lots of other great stuff in the archive of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. There are 13 episodes of the podcast. There's some other documents in there as well. If you want to see what the far left is writing and talking about and having an analysis, breaking it down so you understand the language, then go over, subscribe to that. That is a specific podcast on the Substack that I do to go over leftist literature. Hey, thanks, Malcolm. Mostly ears, much less typing. That is a good rule of thumb. I also want to remind people that there are a couple days left to get a sale in the Red Menace Supply Company, which is my merchandise company. That is redmenacesupply.com. You can find the link in the description below. And for a couple more days, you can take 25% off all orders of $100 or more, so you can stock up on some awesome Christmas gifts, including these classic designs that I put back in the store for the month of December only. These are some of my favorite designs that I've ever made, to include a couple Whiteness Means Capitalism ones, Men Are Not Women. Hey, thanks, NPC. I really do appreciate that. They were in 1984 one, Real Marxism, Be an Outcast. We've also got the McCarthy series, if you want that. We've got some other cool designs, including the one that I'm currently wearing, which is the Decode the Left Plague Doctor design, and it looks awesome. Come on. Does anyone have a better logo than I do? Does anyone have a better thematic logo than I do with the Plague Doctors? No, the answer is no, because plague doctors are awesome and I am the best marketing design genius on the internet. I'm being a little facetious, but not really. Not really. Anyway, we're getting ready for this stream to start. They should be starting any moment now. Guys, please mount the like button over here if you would be so kind. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And we are going to leave the live chat up because we're going to see what's going on in the live chat. And we're going to enjoy this live socialism experience. Feminism against cisness. It's going to be great. It's going to be... Has anyone not listened to Sophie before? One in the chat if you are familiar with Sophie Lewis, our Abolish the Family Goddess. Two in the chat if you are brand new and...
Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to another HM broadcast.
Hi, Alex!
This event is hosted by the Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Struggles stream. My name is Alexander Stoffel, and I'm a member of the Journal's editorial board.
Hi, Alex!
Today, I have the pleasure of convening a discussion on feminism against cisness, which was published last year by Duke University Press. It is a remarkable volume that showcases feminist thought freed from the conceptual strictures of cisness, with contributions from Marquise Bay, Kay Gabriel, Jules Gill-Peterson, Durba Mitra, and many others.
Jules Gill-Peterson.
We're fortunate to have with us Emma Heaney, the editor of the volume, as well as Sophie Lewis, Lola Olufemi, and Maxie Wallenhorst to speak to us about how the book resonates with or complements their own work, or perhaps departs from it in certain ways. So here's how the event will work. I will start by providing a brief overview of Emma's introduction to Feminism Against Cisness for those in the audience who might not have had the chance to read the book yet. And then I'll introduce our panelists. Each of them will speak for around 10 to 12 minutes. And that should leave us with about 30 minutes for audience questions.
Guys, how is my volume compared to that?
Towards the end. So please do post any questions you have or comments in the chat, and then I'll make sure to put them to our speakers later on. Okay, so a brief introduction to the book. Feminism Against Cisness makes a pretty straightforward claim. Assigned sex should not determine the value of any human being. This feminist demand is a problem for global systems of domination that rely on sex-based hierarchizations of human beings. In other words, it presents a challenge to cisness. Cisness is the ideology that ontologizes sex as an ordained hierarchy of human beings. Emma's introduction to Feminism Against Cisness therefore opens with the memorable claim that cisness is feminism's counter-revolution. Cisness orients the definition of feminism away from a revolution in the hierarchy of human value that capital accumulation depends on and reproduces, and in its place offers cis women the possibility to advance within that patriarchal hierarchy of value. It would be wrong to describe Feminism Against Cisness as advocating for a trans-inclusive feminism. What we find in the book is not a feminism to which trans people now must be added, but a feminism that seeks to abolish cisness. If the abolition of cisness is feminism's political task, then its intellectual task is to develop a theory of sexual difference without cisness. And in the introduction to the book, Emma proposes just that. She arrives at a theory of sexual difference without cisness by inquiring into the two materialisms that structure embodied life. And spoiler alert, neither of those two materialisms is going to be the so-called material truth of biological sex. So the first one is historical materialism. Feminism Against Cisness adopts the Marxist feminist insight that capitalism leverages hierarchies based on assigned sex in its reproduction of distinctions between, on the one hand, productive, value-producing labor, and on the other hand, the unproductive and hence valueless labor that constitutes the feminized reproductive sphere.
Patriarchy.
Capital's subordination of unproductive to productive labor reproduces existing hierarchies as it, for instance, differentiates between the value of male and female labor power, or as it expels women from the sphere of formal value-producing labor altogether. Cis ideology makes those hierarchies then appear as the natural outcome of biological differences rather than as the outcome of capital's laws of motion.
Oh my God.
The second materialism, in her theory of sexual difference without cisness, is the material reality of sex, which Emma argues is the penetrability of the body. All bodies can be penetrated, but not everyone is equally associated with penetrability. So we are differentially positioned regarding that universal reality of the body. Sexual difference hierarchizes bodies into penetrator and penetrated. It establishes a link between penetrability and subordination, where to be in a position of social power is to deny one's penetrability, and to be socially positioned as powerless, feminized, is to be available for penetration. And these two materialisms are connected. So we have one, the feminine is devalued materially through its relegation to the sphere of reproduction. And then two, the valuelessness of the feminine is then ontologized as sexual penetrability. And together, those two materialisms, so historical materialism and the material reality of the body of sex, articulate a theory of sexual difference without cisness. So in short, the material basis of sexual difference is not cisness. It is capital's subordination of non-value producing to value producing labor and the subsequent association between valuelessness and penetrability. In other words, feminism against cisness offers us an ideology critique. Even though cisness presents itself as a self-evident biological truth, it is in reality an ideological justification of capitalist social relations. As Emma writes in the introduction, quote, "Cisness has no material basis of its own, only the one it attains via its imbrication in sexual difference. The ideology's relation to the physical structure of our bodies produces the impression of a real basis in chromosome, flesh, follicle, hormone, muscle, and organ." End quote. So just as Marx describes capitalism as an inverted world of appearances where social relations take the illusory form of objective material things, commodities, Emma describes cisness as the ideology that makes the hierarchization of humans based on assigned sex appear as the objective matter of biological difference. Cisness has no objective material basis. Rather, it emerges from a social of hierarchization that gives rise to the impression
They're saying
of a
biological sex
transhistorical
isn't real.
biological facticity. It allows the effects of social differentiation to take the mystifying appearance of a simple material truth, binary sex, while social systems of patriarchal violence assume the guise of inescapable biological fate. So the book's intellectual contribution is a feminist theory. Its political contribution is to name an antagonism that is adequate to revolutionary feminism. Radical or revolutionary theory, after all, has to name enemies. Capitalism, imperialism, settler colonialism, apartheid, the list is long. But the axiomatic enemy for queer and trans theory has never been as easy to pinpoint. Sometimes it's heteronormativity, sometimes it's the category of woman, perhaps even gender itself. But those terms have never seemed quite equivalent to other systems of domination and oppression. This book names an antagonism that's more systematic, layered, totalizing, and perhaps even more global. It argues that it is cisness that has limited the revolutionary horizons of feminism.
Wow.
And so to explore those revolutionary horizons,
Biological sex has
the ones
limited
that a feminism against
essentially.
cisness might open up, we're joined by Sophie Lewis, Lola Olufemi,
You
Maxi
can't abolish
Wallenhorst,
the
and
patriarchy
Emma
without
Heaney.
abolishing biological
So now I'll just
sex.
introduce our speakers in order. So Sophie Lewis is a writer and self-described recovering academic who lives in Philadelphia and teaches online courses at the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. Her essays appear everywhere from the LRB to N+1, and you can follow or support her writing on patreon.com. Sophie is the author of Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family, Abolish the Family, A Manifesto for Care and Liberation, and Enemy Feminisms, nailed it, TERFs, Girl Bosses, and Police Women Against Liberation. Sophie's forthcoming books include the essay collection Femphilia and a monograph titled The Liberation of Children. Lola Olufemi is a Black feminist writer, researcher, and lecturer in fine art critical studies at Goldsmiths, University of London. They are the author of Feminism Interrupted, Disrupting Power, Experiments in Imagining Otherwise, and the forthcoming Against Literature. Maxi Wallenhorst is a writer living in Berlin. Her recent writing has appeared in Berlin Review, and she's currently working on a fiction project provisionally titled Sex After the City. And finally, Emma Heaney is a teacher and scholar of comparative literature, trans studies, and Marxist feminism. She is the author of The New Woman, Literary Modernism, Queer Theory, and the Transfeminine Allegory, and This Watery Place, 4 essays on gestation. She's also the editor of the book we are discussing today, Feminism Against Cisness, and is currently editing a follow-up volume, which will be entitled Provincializing Cisness, Essays Beyond the Empire of Bourgeois Sex.
Yeah, this is a
A
presentation.
study of the literary
People posturing a
reflection
presentation.
of the
You gotta
historical
fucking deal with that.
disarticulation
Grow the
of
fuck
gayness
up.
from transness, entitled Ghost Cousins, Literature After Cisness, is forthcoming in 2027. Okay, and that's enough for me. Sophie, I'll hand over to you.
Hi. Great to be here. Thanks, Alex, for that
Sophie.
introduction. There was a conversation I was lucky enough to have with Emma at Pinko magazine, and we entitled that conversation On the Cisness of the Bourgeoisie. And one of the most illuminating things I think Emma said in that
K1,
conversation
I don't want to see you over in that
was
chat.
in response to me asking her to clarify why cisness is important, precisely as a way of giving us the option of dropping entirely language of gender and even the binary and things like this. And
It's about abolishing gender.
Emma, you laid out that cisness makes an incision that helps us name the damned if you conform, damned if you violate nature of the racial order of capitalist sex. So cisness helps us perceive and name the technology that makes available specific kinds of, you put it, regard and self-regard stemming from being not like the other girls, that are in fact part and parcel of power for bourgeois white women. So you came up with cisness, I believe, because you have been asking, how do we name the fact that this racial form is distinct from, say, butchness and trans masculinity? Because it is precisely the racial and class dimension of cisness that allows bourgeois women to access masculine priority without being exposed to transphobia, without being punished for deviations from womanhood, without being associated with the racialized history of transness and queerness. So cisness is a racialized presumption of sexed naturalness.
What?
And it actually affords, and this is key, a great deal of gender expansiveness to white bourgeois people in particular. And in our era, this modality you wrote, I'm quoting, of cisness is most visible and significant in the availability of masculine priority to bourgeois white women. And the example I remember you giving at one point was Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So how is it that
white
Marjorie
women are
Taylor Greene
allowed
is
to
not
be
punished
more
for deviations from
masculine? They're allowed
womanhood
to
when she,
usurp the
I would say,
patriarchy.
femphobically punishes someone like Jasmine Crockett for her, in a sense, you would think, conformance to femininity. Jasmine Crockett being a cis woman. Cisness helps us understand how that works. So you tell us the analytic categories of, the binary and
Sophie's
even,
non-binary,
gender
by the way.
obfuscate these matters, because an analysis through the binary would view Marjorie Taylor Greene and other bourgeois white women engaged in aspects of non-normative gender activity as a kind of antagonist to tradition. And indeed, I look at plenty such figures in my book, Enemy Feminisms. And this has nothing to offer us, that kind of understanding of the sort of the radicality, the non-normativity of
I
cis,
disavow all of the bullshit
macho
going on in the
women,
chat
for
with that
example,
Moon Man. And if Moon Man is over
who
in
are
my chat, he's
it's
going to
their
get permanently
bourgeoisness
banned.
that matters, that we can name as cisness. This to call it, to call this, feminist is I think important and accurate. But to stop there gives us, has nothing to offer us in an analysis of the racialized pathologizing of sex, as you put it, especially when it's a pathologizing of supposed conformity with assigned roles that we are looking at. Okay, and that's a really important, illuminating, and as you are often wont to put it, Emma, future-bound intervention or heuristic. And why is it important? Well, it almost feels redundant. You can sort of gesture around you at the conjuncture, but Katharina Hunfeld notes in Historical Materialism Journal this week that there is still a worryingly large number of TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, tolerated in Marxist circles. And this is because, to quote you again, Emma, also in communist traditions, the horizon of women's freedom is dogged by a silly attachment to the cisness of the bourgeoisie, the mode of expression of which is an allergy to girl stuff, stemming from a chump's acquiescence to capital's ruse that dignified work is the production of surplus value. And here you and I are, I think, engaged in very much the same project of exposing the anti-work kernel of a feminism against cisness. What is the antidote to this, I might say, femphobic allergy that within Marxism that you're naming? So feminism against cisness, obviously, and I might call it femphilia, a femphilic cyborgian class consciousness of the labor basis of human becoming, of beauty, of cared forness, of pleasure, of sociality, which is to say of all worthwhile life. So again, as you know, this year I published what I intend and hope to be an anti-fascist strategy intervention laying bare Western feminisms, and I mean that in the plural, some Western feminisms' role in the counter-revolutionary logic of cisness, which your body of work, Emma, suggests to me is an anti-labor metaphysics, a fiction of sex's unmadeness and automaticness, not to mention a modern notion which has harmed all women by bifurcating and hierarchizing us in relation to maternal potential, very narrowly and nationalistically defined. In your introduction, you suggest, I think you clarify this in the introduction, feminists can have sexual difference if we want to. We can very well understand sexual difference, and crucially, we have often understood sexual difference before now without cisness. And the beautiful gloss on this that you give us is to say that sexual difference is material is different than saying it's natural or eternal. Far from it. It is, in fact, to say the opposite. And in the conclusion of Enemy Feminisms, I try and follow this logic through. It is a challenging logic.
Well, it looks like the retards are going to ruin it for us again today in the chat. So we'll just have to do this from behind a supporter paywall from now on.
Get with it. We know already that can change. We don't need a different category, gender, to illuminate this. Many people talk, for example, about prison as a place where men are unsexed.
This is why conservatives will never defeat the left, by the way. This is all that conservatives have to offer.
Imposed via
shitposting like
unchosen,
retards.
To be feared. But sex also often changes, outside of prison over the course of a person's day. You write, a butch can experience masculinist priority amidst community in the dyke bar. And in a way, that is maleness. Not in a way. Perhaps I shouldn't be qualifying it this in that sense, right? She can be feminized by harassers on the subway home and be unpleasantly reinscribed into femaleness. Within one day, a CEO can dominate a boardroom and be subject to brutal or subtle misogynist undermining by her husband at home, right? This is because sex is not prediscursive, that we cannot split it from gender in the way that has been common in queer theory, right? All bodies are penetrable, but sexual difference, as we all tend to think about it, is a social hierarchy based on denying this universal penetrability.
Good, they banned him.
So sex is, on the one hand, a pull of affinity, a feeling of bodily identification with people situated on one side of a binary or the other, and this is the sense in which Kay Gabriel insists, we have to understand, the pleasure of gender, even as we abolish it as an accumulation strategy.
Abolishing gender.
But on the other hand, there is this sense of sex as a dehumanizing push toward classification. At the same time as we choose elements of it, sex is subjection, based on this idea that penetration is subordinating, paired with the ascription of penetrability to some bodies and not others. That's complex. But the good news, in a sense, is that much as we pretend that it is, sex is not bound to specific anatomical wholes. Not only is cisness feminism's counter-revolution, but there is no sense in which biology is against us, and nor is there anti-biologism in our argument. In the Pinko magazine conversation I mentioned, we extrapolated that feminism against cisness has no reason to fear the biological, quite the contrary. Lived biology is on our side, and this is part of why we're both refusing to cede, to vacate the ground of feminism, to allow ourselves to be evicted from the house of feminism. We're demonstrating using materialism, and I think this watery place is the best example of that I've ever seen, right? The falsity of any kind of tendency to view, for example, anti-colonial, race-critical, value form theorizing and practice as somehow additive.
I'm turning off their
at
chat
best
because
something
it's just
called
people talking to
feminism,
me and I don't
and
want
at
to see it.
worst actively antagonistic to it. Your de-cis-sexualizing gesture is a reclamatory gesture, a decolonizing gesture, and one that really is future bound. And sex is not cis. What you mean by that, I think, is partly that the history of science produces dyadic human sexuation only via creative and often, frankly, violent methods, as we learn from scholars like Juliana or Jules Joanne Gleason and Beans Veloci. And the other facet, as you lay out in
Jules
The
Joanne
New
Gleason
Woman,
wrote
is that the
Feminism,
recasting of
or
sex
edited it.
hierarchy as a binary biological fact follows directly after political challenges to the sanctity of sex as an ordained social hierarchy. So, for example, the 18th and
Patriarchy.
early 19th century advocates of bourgeois women's rights biologized the genders
Capitalist.
of Oriental others because they were trying to contain the challenge to cisness's racial order precipitated by their own political claims for emancipation. And this first book of yours demonstrates that the subsequent pro-homosexual advocacy of the sexological bourgeoisie created its own male cisness, right, and trans femininity as its other, which was a canny and unsuccessful attempt to escape the kind of state repression that destroyed, even, people like the upper class Oscar Wilde. So sexual hygiene campaigns sought to eliminate hijras, amrash, berdash, while the vice police in the metropoles targeted trans femmes, fairies, mollies, and so on. So in this history, you told us the trans femme is not only the disavowed remainder of gay rights, she's also the most viciously pursued victim of state power's project of making the modern world safe for emancipated cis women. And so cisness is the name for the normativity that reincorporated many men, gay men, and feminists into the bourgeois system that their existence would otherwise threaten. So this is ultimately why one would hope that feminism against cisness is a redundancy, a phrase that is redundant in the context of any communist or proletarian feminism, but shamefully, it still isn't the case that it is a redundancy in some leftist movements. And so, to repeat my opening comment, the task before us in this fight against fascism and the fight to communize care is to make against cisness a redundancy, right, through struggle. All right, thank you.
If you didn't
Thank you
understand
so
what
much,
Sophie
Sophie.
just said,
Okay, Mila,
then
let me
you
just
should be
spotlight you real
not
quick.
talking and you should just be coming to streams and listening, just so you know.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was really brilliant, and I just want to say it's a real honor to be able to think about this book with everyone here. So I guess kind of following on from Sophia, I wanted to try and draw out how rereading this book, Emma's introduction especially, I think really underlined for me the necessity of understanding again cisness as something that inheres inside of or upholds the markers of sexual difference. And understanding cisness, as we've said, as this kind of ideology rooted in a colonial
Cisness
propriety and a false
upholds the
biology,
markers of
I think helps
sexual
us to
difference. Think about
properly
that.
see its role in ideological interpolation, so that it's the appearance of its naturalness, which ultimately
They all understand each other. It's you who does not understand them. They understand what's going on because they speak the language. You do not speak the language. Your job is to shut the fuck up and listen. No more owning the libs bullshit. I don't want to see it.
the spatial, temporal, and material possibilities of both feminism, queer, and trans liberation as intertwined political methodologies for freedom. It helps us think about what they do, the role they play, in undoing gender in some sense. Both clearly must throw a wrench into the spinning wheel of ideology. These movements have to denaturalize what appears to exist without a history and what appears total in order to return, I think, these projects back to the central kind of tenet of the abolition of a hierarchy of sexual difference, which organizes everything, life, land, labor. But that's all another way of saying, rereading this book made me think, how do we foreground the destruction of the disciplinary social relations that gender imposes, thinking specifically about how frameworks for this already exist in the historical emancipation of the working class and racialized subjects in particular from as far back as the Haitian Revolution. So it made me think about this question of revolution and indeed like mass revolt, and who we become in those moments present. I find that it's hard to pass out these events in gendered terms, right? It's hard to think about participation in forms of struggle or participation in forms of revolution in particular through gendered terms, and why is that? And I think in a similar way, it's the same reason why the production of gendered categories in relation to genocide, especially through legalistic frameworks,
Production
as
of
we're seeing
gender
happening
categories means men
with
and
Palestine
women.
at the moment, this urgency of like women and children as a category not only completely falls flat, but it
Abolishing
actively
the category of
inhibits an
children.
understanding of the kind of bodily annihilation that genocide imposes. So
wow.
In a sense, I'm drawing those like parallels because it feels to me that certain events supersede the strictures of gendered relations. They help us think about sexual difference
Patriarchy.
differently, for want of a better word. They tilt the world on its axis and I think offer us something else. So I guess what I want to offer in response then is this idea that simply, that beyond simply and crucially understanding gender as a racial category, as we all do, beyond this kind of like liberal
Understanding
additive approach
gender
of
as a
cumulative
racial
identity as Black
category.
and a woman, and one way that we might properly displace the ideological hold of cisness as the disciplinary banner of sexual difference, as Emma instructs us to do, is to examine the way that forms of active resistance, participation in, for example, anti-colonial revolts or struggles, have endlessly shaped and reshaped our sense of the emancipatory subject and what they can be. And in doing so, given us a way of undoing or abolishing gender through agential terms, rather than terms that
Abolishing
are
gender?
exclusively premised on negation, like what must disappear. I'm interested in this question of agency, movement, etc. And I want to offer this idea that, of course, gender must disappear, the violent social relation that is gender must disappear, but it won't simply, to kind of follow Sophie's logic, it won't like vanish. It has to be rubbed out in some sense through the repeated patterns and attempts by human beings to produce their own freedom across different locales, across different geographies. And I think for me, I'm thinking in this way because there were specific moments in rereading this book. For example, when Marquise Bey desires a kind of facelessness, they say, quote, a subjectivity that vibrates away from the perinatal circumscription towards insert nothing here. That made me think, who are you in the middle of revolt? And I mean, not before you kind of become a woman, perhaps through sexual violence or the limitations imposed on your bodies or concerns for your safety emerge. But in the moment of facing down your oppressor in a visceral and confrontational
She just said
manner,
if a
you're
man
hard
gets
to pin
raped, he
down.
becomes a
You
woman.
become morphological in some sense. In becoming an emancipatory subject, you almost taste what the abolition of sexual difference might look like, and ultimately undermine, the ideology of cisness. And we might turn, I was thinking about this in history, thinking about Stella Dadzi's book, A Kick in the Belly. And in that she writes about slave rebellion. She writes, quote, in April 1769, many thousands Coromantee and Creole slaves, prompted by the threat of starvation and severity of their conditions, took advantage of the diversion of British imperial forces in the 7 Years' War and rose up simultaneously throughout St. Mary's Parish in Jamaica, end quote. So we can imagine them, attacking and overwhelming Fort Haldane, the British garrison overlooking the Port Maria Harbour. We can imagine them setting fire to sugar and cane fields, fighting off planter militias. We can imagine them advancing into the district and beginning to liberate people from the plantations. And we might think of the many unnamed women forgotten who acted. And I mean forgotten in a historical sense in terms of archive and the historiographical project. But we might think of those people who acted as informants, who were working the front lines, who were lookouts, spies, who aided in the destruction of the oppressor for their liberation as kind of proto-feminists, or as engaging in forms of revolutionary struggle to improve their lives and the lives of the people that they loved. But what's clear is that in the disruption of the condition of dispossession, in the process of emancipatory struggle, sexual difference is displaced with another imperative. And maybe we can think, it's an invitation to think about what that imperative is. But in the spirit of abolishing cisness as this kind of ideological scaffolding of sexual difference, the process of there's something for me about the process of self-actualization, political consciousness in the event of revolution, which completely upends the racialized and gendered hierarchies imposed on human life. Struggle equalizes, not always, not in every context, and not in a romantic sense. But I say this because for me, the only times I've ever come
because they
close
believe
to
capitalism created everything.
to achieving that facelessness that Marquise Bay writes about
Hey,
is
Rod,
when I've been
too
involved
stupid to be
in
here,
kind of
bro.
feminist
Sorry, very
organization.
sorry.
And I
told
think
you to stop,
they
you
also do
didn't.
in
Bye.
their essay this very beautiful thing where they say, sometimes I go into even these quote unquote progressive spaces and it seems like they want me to account for how I am perceived. And I think they say something like, it feels sometimes that they want me to be a man, and how cruel for me and for others. And I think that there's something like really beautiful in that. So how do instances of revolt challenge the reification of sexual difference, the feminine feminized as infinitely penetrable and the masculine as agential, by providing us a vision of a collective communal exertion of human effort for the purposes of freedom? Inversely, I think with my favorite Marxist, the social reproductionist, how is the hierarchy of sexual difference folded in half when in the moment of commune formation, the life-affirming task of social reproduction must be assumed by everyone, for each according to their ability, to each according to their needs? What's the relationship between a shift in focus from the body doing or undoing gender towards process movement in providing a rupture in the many layers that gender operates, the material, the symbolic, the conceptual? And ironically, I think these actions, these collective actions might also set desire free in that way that Sophie was talking about, so that transsexual desire specifically is no longer limited or regulated through a requirement for aesthetic legibility. And I think that
you don't need
that
to look
shift
like a woman
reawakens
to be a
our
woman.
attention to the relation that is gender. It opens our eyes to this idea that gender is not a total weighted truth, but a dynamic,
by
and
eliminating
its
gender.
disciplinary metrics are always open to contestation. And in the most basic Marxist sense, struggle enlivens that contest. And I'm thinking also with Ella Rourke and Jules Gleason in Transgender Marxism, when they're talking about the reclamation of trans liberation from this kind of liberal abstraction, though I do think that we need language and ways to think about the non-material textures of our lives. But they say, both of them say, quote, "Our struggle is one that must be understood as intimate, concrete, and particular. Transition is not a dive into unbounded expansiveness, but a mess that 1,000 failed attempts at comprehensive sociology have tried to push out of view, a persistent irritant, disturbing the smoothness of grand narratives." So I guess to close, to think again with, Emma's introduction, I think in this moment, in an openly fascistic age, the necessity of understanding all of us who sell our labor to survive as fucked, fuckable, open to violation is crucial. And also thinking about us as in parallel capable of pushing back against, through, with our actions, which produce not only a kind of a collectivity and a self-autonomy, but an ability to meet human need. I think that this action helps us to widen the scope of our thinking about gender, which is, sometimes unhelpfully and very neatly summarized in this idea of like the body versus the world. Either gender is a project of personal and subjective self-construction or a kind of coercive disciplinary framework. And we know here as feminists that it's not as simple as saying, gender is both. We know that gender is also the mediation of relationships of violence, which inhere crucially everywhere. I think that like being a Black feminist thinker produces both this desire to de-exceptionalize the purported freedom of individual gender transgression, because to be racialized, I think, is already a kind of transgression. And I don't mean that produces a radical subject. I don't mean it produces a queer subject, but I mean that the legacies of race science produce non-normative subjects. The legacies of colonialism produce non-normative subjects. But I like that de-exceptionalization I want to happen in favor of a kind of collective transgression that directs our attention elsewhere, maybe directs our attention back to this question of resource and need. To understand the question of race in relation to cis ideology is not only to focus on the historical transformation of race itself, but how people have materially refused the subjection that it's pushed on them to take back. What the question is, what do we take back in the spirit of tumult and
capitalism. They're talking about the overthrow of
that is caused by riot, revolt, and the violence of revolution. In all of these historical and present day instances where the violent hierarchy of sexual difference becomes the target for destruction, it reminds me that many people are necessary to achieve that task. Many people will be necessary to take part in the abolition and the kind of burning down of the hierarchy of sexual difference. And that's precisely why gender, in the words of Kay Gabriel, is this vehicle for capital accumulation. That's exactly why capital plays a trick on us in gender.
Gender is the vehicle for capital.
But I think also maybe it moves us away from thinking in this way, moves us away from the essentialization of race, also in the definition of gender, to return to kind of Stuart Hall's idea of race as a floating signifier, is to return to the primacy of understanding that the force of certain kinds of the colonial constitution of gender and race is not just the double burden of its effects, but the inseparability of the disciplinary nature of the categories under capitalism, and crucially, the kinds of degradation of life that they produce
of the categories
conceptually,
under
materially,
capitalism,
symbolically, and spiritually. And I lean on this focus on movement and process and emancipatory subjecthood and participation as a means of abolishing sexual difference, because I'm thinking in practical terms. And it reminds me, as did Emma's introduction, of all the ways that the notion of the hierarchy of sexual difference or the sex binary is already compromised or muddied, and how communist, feminist, queer movements can kind of take a hold of this and wield it for their own purposes. The ideology of cisness
Marie,
is
you need to
already
stop
corroded,
talking and listen.
just as the hierarchy of sexual difference
No
is,
statements,
because it
only
doesn't
questions
neatly
from you.
follow everywhere and always that man is superior, safe, that cis means normative, etc. And why is that? Because of the operation of capitalism and its stratification of people's labor and means of subsistence. So for me, it seems like this is where we begin to plot in the words of kind of Kathy Cohen, as people that history has either placed outside of the bounds of heteronormative and cisnormative power, or as people whose participation in struggle will do that. Thank you so much.
Hi. Yeah,
Who's
I wanted to
this?
start with this sentence from Emma's first book, The New Woman, which is an instant classic, of course, and I've been quoting for years. And in this sentence, Emma writes of the representational disjuncture between trans self-knowledge and trans meaning. And I think my response is kind of invested or situated in this disjuncture between, or in exploring this disjuncture between self-knowledge, or we could perhaps also say desire, and trans meaning, by which Emma, I think, means something like allegorization or figuration or abstraction. And I read her provocation in Feminism Against Cisness, and also in Sexual Difference Without Cisness, the introduction that we're discussing today. And I'm also very interested in this 1-2 punch of against and without as the totalization of this critique and of this disjuncture, as a prompt similar to what Alex was saying, to reorient, rededicate feminism not through the inclusion of trans experience or figurality, or any form of marginalization for that matter, but through the mediation of its disjuncture as antagonism against cisness. And the concept cisness, I think, captures so productively how the scope of what I would call, ambivalently, of course, my field, trans studies, is shifting across its various vernacular and scholarly forms. Against cisness, we work through our week.
Then go watch retard content somewhere else. I'm not, I do not have the patience for this conservative bullshit today. If you cannot sit through boring content, you do not belong on this fucking channel. I'm like so close to just shutting down the stream. Honestly, I already can't get questions in because conservative retards ruin that. I'm so close to just ending it and doing it myself.
Coming. And as I understand it, this too is a materialism that can only unfold through totalization. And here I'll quote Alex, and I preface this by saying that I think this is a materialism that
conservative retards ruining everything again.
Is kind of bent or played from the other side. And Alex writes in a brilliant contribution recently, indeed, we might say that if to be radical for Marx was to grasp the root of the matter, queer and trans materialisms teach us that it is simultaneously to grasp the rootlessness of what appears as matter. Cisness then helps us name the ideology, I would also perhaps say controversially, the visceral abstraction that materializes
hey, you just got permanently
sex
banned,
as
bye.
the brutal fact that we're both outside of, and that's inside of us.
This is why we paywall this
Cisness is a
stuff.
name for the processes through which the mode of reproduction naturalizes, genders, and racializes, disables this rootlessness of matter from a global to the most atomized scale. As Jody Rosenberg and Jules Gould-Peterson's works help us understand too, this is paradoxical. Cisness plasticizes sexual difference at the same time as it fixes and naturalizes it. It kind of makes sex change thinkable, also, of course, through while at the same time denying it. And because Emma has asked for critiques too, I want to offer two here, though you'll realize it's just more praise thinly disguised as critique, and draw out two inversions that I think are implied in a feminism against cisness. So one is about abstraction and the other one is about desire. Abstraction. Where do we situate the body against cisness? Emma's introduction traces a compelling genealogy. The universal penetrability of bodies is organized into sexual difference through the valorization and devalorization of social reproduction. Cisness then naturalizes this organization, making it appear self-evident and biological. But I might wonder, I wonder if
Cisness naturalizes what
to
this
also
person just
invert
said.
this.
I need to make sure people understand this. The concept of cisness, which really they're meaning capitalism, naturalizes the gender hierarchy, so it seems like it was always there. The goal of queer Marxists is to abolish all gender. So their argument is that the gender categories of men and women were created by capitalism. They were socially constructed by capitalism. They're saying the concept of cisness, the concept of adhering to the sex you were assigned at birth, makes those categories seem natural and thus cements the patriarchy. So they can't get rid of the patriarchy unless they get rid of the categories. They can't get rid of the categories unless they denaturalize it. And they're saying that cisness is the thing that it reinforces the categories.
But cannot formalize. So this might sound like a question of like a nitpick and a question of emphasis and of preferred Marxism flavor profile, and that's.
And by the
what
way,
it
if you
is.
didn't understand
But
that, you
I
can
want
ask
to
questions.
emphasize this what I would call maybe the negativity of social reproduction in this way,
Asking questions
as
is allowed,
again Marina
shit-posting
Wishmet, but
is
also
not.
Amy Diaz have done in recent years, to carve out another horizon for sexual difference against or without cisness. Cisness implies that there's no natural body reproduction that we can just go back to and
Capitalism
valorize.
created the
No need that
categories.
we simply have to meet. As we struggle against cisness in order to meet the needs of our so-called bodies, to follow our heart's desires, we have to forge to win these needs. Though this might be just as simple.
Meet the needs of our
This, I think,
so-called
is
bodies.
also one of the provocations of trans studies as a queer materialism of sex. The simple and scandalous discovery of needs beyond their naturalization, how urgent they are, how desirable. Desire. Where do we situate desire without or against cisness? One of the brilliant provocations, I think, of Emma's chapter is her nonchalant emphasis that
we do this
gender identifications
No
emerges
attention to
from
fucking
social
people who are trolling
reproduction,
the stream,
not
just
the
to
other
be
way
assholes.
around. The processes by which it does, however, are not, as she
And
says,
next time, we just do
straightforward,
it behind
but
a paywall.
idiosyncratic, and I might even want to sneak in the word unconscious here. At the same time as it binarizes, cisness bifurcates beyond the binary. Rather than a pure binary men and women, Emma writes, cisness produces a myriad of racialized and class categories of people.
No, there will
Read
not be
against
time for
cisness,
questions
there's
tonight.
nothing more value-formed about Joe Rogan's TRT biceps than about dazzlingly handsome trans men at the underground rave. This also means, sadly, letting go of the hope, and I think this is kind of coming through in many of our contributions to tonight. This also means, sadly, letting go of the hope that there's something inherently destabilizing or anti-normative about any one gender identification. Emma talks about the anchoring of gender identification in terms of proximity to feminized labor. Retrospectively, someone might become a woman through her relation to washing, ironing, cooking, as Marsha P. Johnson's childhood memories suggest. What's implicit here, I think, and what I want to draw out is the role of not just affinity, but also lack. Retrospectively, someone might also become a man through disaffiliation from the experience of feminization, from the experience of sex work or motherhood, etc. Gender identification emerges not only from what we're drawn to, but from what we're denied, what fails, what's impossible. There's a tag of desire in gender identification here. I too go to Kay's contribution in this transformative volume, where she also speaks, and Emma echoes this in the introduction, of where she insists of the sexual in transsexuality. If gender identification emerges from social reproduction, and if social reproduction under capital is by definition contradictory or borderline impossible, gender identification is also the attempt to mediate and not least to sexualize these contradictions, this impossibility. Where social reproduction leaves us wanting, gender, cis or trans, is how we articulate and disarticulate, fantasize wanting differently. A different sex, a different life, a life in which washing, ironing, cooking might mean something else entirely. Wanting some
Playing with he's saying that playing with gender is how they experiment with a different type of lifestyle. That means life after capitalism, life in the Marxist society.
cisness. And that's maybe another scandalous
They're
discovery
queering
of trans
gender
studies.
norms in order
Sometimes
to queer
you might
society.
even get what you want without cisness. And then what? Thank you.
Hi, guys. So as universities are ever more fully captured by the fantasies of consultants, people like Alex, who do the only real work of the university, which is convening people to read and study and think together, become ever more precious to us. And so I want to really thank him for his work. Thanks so much to Lola for being here, even though we don't know each other and have never met till today, and to my two close thought friends, Sophie and Maxie. I'm really looking forward to a conversation after this, and those were beautiful papers. So my remarks today articulate the research propositions that I'm in the process of studying right now across the book I'm writing and the book I'm editing. And so I really welcome everyone's perspectives, suspicions, etc. Both projects elaborate the claim that Alex cited in his introduction, that cisness is feminism's counter-revolution, and that several of my colleagues talked about. So at its most generalized, I'm arguing cisness as the racialized presumption of sexed naturalness, as a structuring component of racial, colonial, and class distinctions across many contexts. At its most generalized,
that is fucking
cisness
crazy.
is one of the principal components of bourgeois cultural authority as it solidifies in the 19th century. And this process adheres in modes of racialization and coloniality specific to local context. In The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, Foucault concludes that contrary to the Marxist analysis of bourgeois sex suppression, quote, the bourgeoisie did not disqualify or nullify sex in order to put those whom it dominated to work. That aspect of itself, of the bourgeois class, which troubled and preoccupied it more than any other, that begged and obtained its attention, and which it cultivated with a mixture of fear, curiosity, delight, and excitement. The bourgeoisie made sex identical with its body. It staked its life and death on sex. This class must be seen as being occupied from the mid-18th century on with creating its own sexuality and forming a specific body based on it, a class body with its health, hygiene, descent, and race intact. The bourgeoisie's blood was its sex. The superiority of this blood, the body's health and vigor, was ensured by a repackaging of the nobility's obsession with genealogy into the bourgeoisie's biologized obsession with heredity and its medicalized form of
She's
expression.
talking about why
eugenics.
capitalism created gender sex.
The defense of these reproducible, healthy bourgeois bodies that became the protagonists of the bourgeois state is undertaken in the terms of, for Foucault, a dynamic racism, a racism of expansion.
This has nothing.
I'm suggesting that cisness is a more accurate.
The animal kingdom has nothing to do with fucking capitalism. They are arguing that capitalism creates gender. That is what the argument is. That has nothing to do with the animal kingdom at all, bro. Is the answer, honestly. They're talking about the system of capitalism.
The hysteric, as Foucault has it. There are myriad iterations of non-cis sexed figures and populations that in different places and times offer the counter figure that defines through contrast bourgeois sexed propriety. It is this sovereign claim to sexed propriety that grounds the natural, biologically ordained nature of bourgeois social supremacy. The racialized presumptions of sexed naturalness, cisness, proves hugely flexible from the mid-19th century to the present as a tool. So Cisness has both a chronology of historical emergence that tracks with the consolidation of national identities, always both inward-facing consolidations, homogenizings of populations internal to the nation state through the homogenizing of populations into the culture and language of the center of wealth and power in nation states, and also outward-facing, right? The consolidation, the distinguishing of people at national borders. So I offer two examples to illustrate how Cisness works as constitutive of this bourgeois identity that polices both inwardly and outwardly. And the sort of difference of the national context here is the point. Emily Skidmore's 2017 History of Trans Men in the United States around the turn of the 20th century relies largely on newspaper articles that, in a sort of sensationalistic way, reveal the trans status of men.
Conservatives have no fucking clue what the left believes, and this chat is just indicative of like conservative influencers have absolutely destroyed the brains of their own fucking audiences. You guys have no idea what you specifically have no idea what's being said right now. So I recommend you listen and ask questions because you know nothing, bro. You know nothing.
The vice of having a social sex that is different than the one that is revealed at death, as these articles put it. This vice was to be expected in cities. And we think here of the available histories of urban trans feminine life in this period around the turn of the 20th century. While this would be expected, that you'd find this sort of thing in cities, quote, and this is Skidmore, metropolitan newspapers were able to present the rural countryside as bastions of wholesome American values. And so this idea that there were trans men there were this kind of person there, was a scandalous shock. So here my interest is twofold. The assertion of the cisness and whiteness of rural America is operating in relation to the ethnic perversity of cities, which have been populated by immigrants, but as had these rural areas, right? So it's this mechanism that smooths the ethnic particularity of Norwegians or Bohemians or whatever into American whiteness. This is part of the of that cultural expansion of whiteness. But
Cultural
second,
expansion of whiteness.
These newspapers enact historical amnesia regarding the extremely recent history of indigenous sovereignty in many of these rural places. This is like, all of the men that are the subjects of Skidmore's book were born before the passage of the Dawes Act, and several before treaties that that ended indigenous land rights in the areas in which these men lived. So scholars including Jamie Jesperson and Kai Pyle are compiling Indigenous trans women's and Two-Spirit histories of the period that further illustrate what is being sublimated when these organs of American cultural expansion present rural America as white and cis in this fin de siècle period. But I'm also thinking here, in addition to the specific histories of Two-Spirit or Indigenous trans women, about the way that the bureaucracy of cultural genocide in the late 19th century of Indigenous cultural genocide of Indigenous life, through allotment, through the use of reservation as sites of social control, and through residential schools, were all sites of punishment of Indigenous lifeways that were deemed inassimilable with American cultural mores. So this included prominently the forcible cutting of hair and the enforcement of the wearing of settler-approved clothes and of settler-approved sort of socialities and sex roles, right? So this is one this sort of innovation in the creation of an unmarked whiteness in the Americas is one of these places that I want to suggest that cisness is revealed as part of this project of national consolidation. Second, I offer the example of Afsana Najmabadi's history of the sexual revision that occurred in Qajar, Iran, Women with Mustaches, Men Without Beards, which argues that the late 19th century's dazzlingly abrupt cultural disappearance of the figure of the Amrad, the beardless male beloved who was at the center of Iranian systems of socio-erotics, that this occurred through the writing of modernizers who sought to produce a secular Iranian state that would escape the backwardness of sex segregation. and relinquishing veiling was the other paradigm for the condition of possibility for the modern future of companionate marriage and an Iranian nationalism in Najmabadi's telling. So here, cisness adheres not in the transfeminization of the male beloved, but first in the Amrad sublimation and then the historical disappearance. That's the story that Najmabadi's text tells. Iranian nationalism hinged on the banishing of a perginate sociality that did not require social role to be organized by genitality into two sexed roles. And to be clear, just, to recall several of the comments previously about the binary of gender versus cisness, there was a very robust social binary of gender during the Qajar period, but it didn't adhere in this idea that genitals organized one into one of two roles as the basis for sociality and sexuality. So this is why cisness is the analytic in my view. So other areas of historiographic interest here are and these are just to name a few of the many that I'm interested in and pursuing right now, the histories of the masculinity ascribed to working class women that Anne McClintock, for instance, theorizes in Imperial Leather in the British context, and her highlighting of the way that projections of northernness or Irishness or Scottishness or Welshness, this sort of regional and ethnic differences related to the idea of the contrast between the inappropriately masculine proletarian woman and the properly sexually dimorphic idle bourgeois woman. Or, for instance, Durba Mitra's account of the speciation of the prostitute in the South Asian context in connection with Hijra history, including the work of Jessica Hinchy. So for the rest of the points, I don't have time to sort of fully evidence them here with examples, but I'll just briefly mention these sort of postulates that I'm working through that guide my current research. So in addition to the account of a 19th century emergence, I'm also suggesting that cisness has the tendency to be revitalized to contain challenges to sexed hierarchies and or to provide the social form that obscures economic crisis or political challenges to bourgeois power. So I'm trying right now to trace both a sort of chronology of cisness's incorporation and proliferation, but also this availability of its ideological components to be revitalized at moments of counter-revolution, but also at moments where political economy means that requires some reorganization of sex in relation to labor. So one of the principal sites for the reinvigoration of cisness in the long 20th century is in responses to feminist claims, particularly from within feminism, regarding the scope and nature of feminist claims. And one example of this in the American context is in the decades of reaction to the provocations of feminism in the late 60s and early 70s. And sort of the easiest example here is how the materialist provocations regarding the sexing of reproductive labor, of rape, of abortion are resolved by what Alex Eccles calls a cultural feminism that adheres in a white bourgeois dream of separatism and sexed border maintenance. So that's sort of clear the way that the provocations to sexual difference are inscribed by this separatist imaginary. With its class and race, often with its class and race characters. But the more interesting story to me is the way in which the foliations of the late 70s and early 80s produce both the white bourgeois figure of the woman doing second shift, and the anti-Black fantasies of women on welfare. So this dual cultural phenomenon both covers the decline of the family wage in the sentimentalized figure of the bourgeois woman who wants it all, as it was constantly presented in headlines in the period, and constitutes the American government's reaction to the militancies of civil rights informed Black women's organizing for public housing and welfare rights in the previous decade, as Rhonda Williamson's work outlines. So the idea that a white bourgeois woman could do wage work and in a saturative class, spanning the class, that bourgeois women could do wage work and still remain real women, and in fact, even perhaps super women. And when we say remain a real woman, we mean perform domestic work. This correlates with the
Being a woman
pathologizing of
means
Black
performing
women's claims
domestic
to
work.
want
It means
support for domestic work,
subjugating yourself to
to be
capitalism.
this idea of whether
That's how they
a
define a
white bourgeois
woman.
woman was like mother
Performing
enough,
domestic work.
in contrast with
Existing in
the sort of
private
excessive motherhood
sphere,
that
not the
was
public
pathologized in
sphere.
regard to Black
Men
women.
have the
And this is
public sphere,
what I've
women
called
have
the
the
damned if you
private
conform,
sphere.
damned if you violate form of the racial regime of cisness. So to situate these claims broadly in the thought that initiated my own understanding here, first, I view my analysis as the obverse of C. Riley Snorton's analysis of the transversal relation of Blackness to transness. So I'm positing the transversal relation of cisness to bourgeois social forms, always a modality of a local race and colonial order. Second, cisness is, in my view, the broader context for Jules Gill Peterson's account of transfeminization. So the drawing together of different lifeways into a relation to transfemininity that Jules observes is a crucial component of the cultural regime of cisness, but there are other modes as well, as some of these examples may have demonstrated, the Skidmore, the Nachimabadi, et cetera, or even the contrast between the two racialized modalities of imagining women's relation to work and motherhood in the 70s and 80s context. Third, in this editing project, I'm drawing together area studies scholars of sex and sexuality whose work preceded trans studies and is therefore not directly engaged with that formation, with new work that is explicitly engaging trans studies methods. So to return to my opening gambit, Foucault provides a helpful account of the form in which the Western European bourgeois family reconciled its own internal contradiction. An internal contradiction that I think is born of its inheritance of the nobility's femme libertinism. How did they reconcile this internal contradiction? Through the sacrificial medicalization, the sort of sacrifice of the gay son of the bourgeois family. But engaging Foucault's analytics of power, engaging the way of thinking that Foucault asks us to engage in, reveals many other ways that bourgeois power laid unique claim to a scientifically verified sexual dimorphism to healthy sexed bodies. And my current editorial project, Provincializing Cisness, aims to gather these. So, and in addition to the counter-revolution of feminism, and almost always imbricated in these movements, there was another principal site for the reinvigoration of cisness in the long 20th century as a bourgeois project, in the foliation of queer identity that begins in the mid-19th century and solidifies in the mid-20th century, disarticulation of transness from gayness in bourgeois understanding. And this is the subject of the book that I'm currently working on writing, Ghost Cousins. But in my first book, the story of bourgeois bickering about where the racializing taint of non-cisness lies
they separated gayness
and how the class can contain it is less interesting than the true story, which is about the vast force of lifeways that violate or more often don't recognize this class concern.
I see a lot of people asking questions in the chat, and those questions usually reflect the fact that you do not understand what is being said right now. This is an advanced stream. If you are not familiar with my work, I highly recommend you leave this stream immediately and you go to my Substack, which is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. Click on the big picture of me on the homepage that says new to my work and go spend this time instead watching the re-education course. That will give you an introduction to the language, because all the people asking questions right now about what she's saying, you don't understand the language. You are in an advanced class when you need to go take the beginner class. So go take the beginner class instead.
Also in the future, in the not yet and the too soon of trans life. So studying this trajectory of locating cisness over there,
so they're still there.
Elsewhere,
psychotic
is less interesting to me than noticing that it's right here in the imminence of non-cisness that compel. It's the imminence of non-cisness in fact, embodiment in sociality that compels and guides me across these.
We're just going to block this person on this account, so I will never see them again. So now they will never show up in the chat.
Brilliant. So we do have just over 20 minutes for questions. So this is an invitation to the audience. Please add any questions that you might have to the chat so that we can.
I just want people to stay out of their chat, honestly.
So I can put them to the speakers. There's been a lively discussion already happening in the chat. Maybe as we give people a second to post their questions, Emma, do you want to say something about provincializing cisness?
I mean, I can just say like some logistical things about it, which is that I'm meeting with my editor tomorrow. I mean, who I hope will be my editor on the project. And I'm still interested in receiving if people have stuff they want to write for it. And yeah, so far there's an essay that's about the conversion of the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul from a mosque into a nationalist secular museum, as the Turkish state is like consolidating its identity, and then its reconversion recently back into a mosque, and its relation to the areas of Istanbul where public trans life is lived. There's an essay about pre-19th century, mostly Jesuit encounters with trans women and Two-Spirit people in the Americas, and the ways in which these Jesuits are writing about those lifeways and people. And let me see, there's an essay about Magnus Hirschfeld's visit to...
Basically, Master Shake, the argument is that cisness as a concept means believing in the biological reality of sex. The concept of cisness normalizes the biological reality of gender, saying that like men and women are a thing. It's believing in the gender binary. That's what they're trying to change the definition of cisness to basically someone that upholds biological sex and gender, and therefore upholds the gender binary, and therefore naturalizes the capitalist hierarchical relationship.
Okay, so we have one question from, I believe, Magdalene, who writes, in the contemporary moment, there's such a proliferation of ways to change one's body, from intensive surgeries to a quick injection of lip filler, which allow new possibilities for transition and also the possibility of heightened cis-sexual dimorphism. Could you speak to how these technological changes fit into a material analysis of sexness?
True.
I guess that's to anyone, any and all speakers. I also have a comment / question that we might want to address from another participant. Sorry.
What
okay.
Okay.
Sorry. So there's just another comment. I'm just going to read out the comment to see if it provokes any thoughts. Someone else writes, I think acknowledging it, I'm not sure what it is, but acknowledging it as a hydra of interdependent mechanisms rather than one or multiple discrete ones strengthens the critique and potential for insurgency and grounds it in transmateriality. Sorry, these are like, there are discussions that are happening in the chat. But I think specifically racial sexuation, biology, socialization, and identity are inextricable, each of these categories being co-constitutive and mutually consolidated, mediated, hence co-analysis. This was for perhaps in response to Lola's. And then let me just put in a third question from Jules. Maybe we can take a couple at the same time. Who says, hello gang, thanks for your wonderful talks and engagement with my co-written introduction with Elle. Would any of you like to comment on sex assignment as a process versus cisness as a position?
Yeah, do that. Good question.
Shall we start there? Some more questions are coming in, but if that sparks any thoughts from anyone.
Jules, do you mean like an identity position? Or do you mean it as an analytic position?
So Jules has a follow-up comment. The disjunctive or disarticulating account two of your talks posed, gay versus transsexual lives, seem one half of the picture, intersex assignments the other. One assignment is not the next. Does that clarify?
Um, maybe I can just start with the first question about
They're not confused, guys.
about the
They're not
possibility of
confused. You are the
heightened
ones that are confused.
cis-sexual dimorphism being a result of the availability of certain kinds of body modifications. And I think that for me, the interesting thing is the way in which certain sex body modifications are becoming more available, perhaps, or less stigmatized or whatever, and others are becoming criminalized, right? So criminalized in the case of doctors being criminalized for providing them and so on, and prohibited via the bureaucratic and versus the elimination of trans healthcare in many places. So it's less about for me, talking about the meaning of certain people's sex decisions about how to modify their bodies, which is something that my intellectual and project is against, the idea that we should be interpreting the meaning of what people do to their bodies, but rather just as a question of resource allocation and the way in which cisness is being produced, not because some gal wants to some cis woman wants to get a boob job, and because it's being withheld from trans people as it's actively being made more available to cis people. So that's my view on the first question.
Let me just read out two more questions. So we have a fourth question, which is, my question was, how does it help or hurt us as transsexual feminists to faint at an ontology of sex? Thinking of Andrea Long-Chu's Freedom of Sex and Jules Gill-Peterson's Reject Transliberalism. Incredible pieces, but still making this move. That was one question. And then there's another question. Queer groups pushing for legal recognition have seen pushback this year. For example, revocation of X gender markers. How can we resolve the tension in groups between pursuing legibility and facelessness? Since I feel that the response of institutions and fascist power this year has shown the strategic flaws in pursuing legibility or recognition within those authoritative structures. Lola?
I can try and speak, I guess, to the first and to the last question. I guess to kind of build on what Emma was saying, I think this question of how it fits into the material analysis of sexness, to me, also is a question of resource allocation, because when I'm thinking about, easy access to people, the ability to change or modify one's bodies, I'm thinking about the ways in which working class people engage in that, how they must cross borders to do that, how they must often put themselves at risk in some sense. And to me, that's where the materialness of it comes from, not necessarily, again, trying to pass out the meaning or trying to think about what does it mean for cis and trans women alike to have access to forms of body modification. For me, I'm thinking in an environment where resource scarcity is pushing people to take more and more risks about the way that they engage in forms of body modification, then the feminist project kind of becomes clear. How do we, in the spirit of what Kay Gabriel kind of poses in her essay, make sure that people have access to the things that they need, and that we have met human need. People have access to the means of self-articulation in some sense that don't necessarily require them to put their lives at risk. That's the basic, communist promise or question. So for me, that's how it fits in. And then in the for question 5, I guess I would say, you know, trying to follow also Nat Raha and Micah Vanderdrift's new book, Transforms Futures, where they very much trace the failure of legal recognition as a kind of strategy for queer rights groups. I think for me, it isn't a question necessarily of resolving the tension, because I think that like any kind of queer group that is attempting a facelessness or attempting to rethink the grounds on which like human beings can articulate themselves necessarily distance themselves from the project of legal recognition as a means through which to do that, because they understand legal recognition as a further limitation in terms of human articulation, right? They're thinking about there has been I think in this country a real shift towards mutual aid and forms of meeting, you know, people's basic needs, as it has been recognized that the state continues to abandon not only them, but abandon whole swaths of the population. So for me, like, it's less this question about tension, and I think it's more this question of how do we build long-term sustaining care infrastructures at grassroots levels that enable people access to that resource that kind of links to question 1, you know, DIY hormones, all of these things, whilst maintaining a critique on the of the way the state has slowly and, you know, in the present moment, actually very fast, like begun to expel trans people from, and continues to expel trans people from forms of like public life, right? Like, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we just have 9 more minutes. So why don't I just throw in the last
God.
question that's come in, and then I'll give everyone an
Suffering is almost
opportunity to maybe
over.
say any closing remarks. So we've had a question that says, apologies if this question is a little underbaked, but Emma's bringing up of temporality makes me wonder, does the negation of pulling apart categories like sex, class, race accrue into something positive over time, a tradition? Or does it maybe at least identify some new or more interesting gaps for subjects to be constructed around?
I think the answer to this is Lola's description of the like status of identity in the work of struggle, and the way that that participation in the real movement of like producing the future always involves these kind of conjunctures and experiences of the self that can't be like formulated as identities beforehand. And so there's a sort of like necessarily future bound quality to I was thinking so much when you were talking about the way that Zionists scream at trans and queer blocks in Palestine solidarity marches, like, you know, you want to go get thrown off a roof, or you want to go get raped or whatever, you know, and the way in which that is the actual clocking of the way in which trans and queer and feminist participation in the real movement that is that anti-colonial struggle is producing solidarities, and even like sort of like experiences of the self beyond what could have been like scripted or explained through ahead of time. It's in that project of solidarity that the sexual violence of colonial regimes is sort of manifest as a ground for solidarity, you know. And it's not that people like know that and they're like, this affects me and that's why I'm going to go and do this, but rather it's through the like conjunctures of projects and moments of uprising that produce those. That was very like named something that I've experienced and seen and valued, but never like knew how to think through properly.
Amazing. Maxi, Sophie, was there anything that you wanted to come in on and add? You don't have to, of course. Because otherwise, there was one more question. Oh, sorry, Sophie.
Very briefly, I was chewing over the question about fainting at an ontology of sex in Andrea Longchu and Jules Gill-Peterson's recent pieces, these sort of landmark pieces that Emma's actually convened a symposium around reading alongside other texts as well very recently. And I wasn't sure I agree that ontology is what's happening in these pieces. However, I'm chewing it over in my head, and I think what comes to mind is certain obsessional, sort of totally unuseful conversations about definition, right? Definition of woman, that leak into the left. And in a recent response I offered to the trans Supreme Court ruling in the UK, you know, I tried to add my voice to those from movement for trans liberation, pointing out, you know, we just do not need a definition of woman for feminism to proceed. And we never have.
We don't
and I
need
think
a
there is,
definition of woman for
a way that
feminism to
sexual
proceed,
difference
and
can
we
be
never
and
have.
is material, and that we can assert with Andrea and Jules in their different
Because
ways.
the definition of woman is not the point. They want to
right or a
abolish the
collective
category
freedom
entirely.
or a birthright, an entitlement, however way you want to phrase it, to remake our sex collectively without actually needing an ontology. I would agree with the question's implication that it would hurt our politics to flirt with ontological bases for womanhood, but I don't think that's what these arguments are doing.
Amazing. Okay,
Yeah,
I have a final
amazing.
question
Very
that is
stunning and brave,
for
Sophie.
directed towards you, Emma, about provincializing cisness, which might be a
Stunning
nice
and
one to end
brave.
on because it's the follow-up to feminism and cisness. So the question is, can you ask Emma to elaborate how she's mediated her critique of bourgeois cisness through other notions of hierarchy, as she has globalized the critique of cisness in the new work on provincializing cisness? But also, if the nation has been central to how this has happened, both in the US and Iran, then what analytics might also become visible in this globalizing of her critique?
So the an analytic is that cisness doesn't encounter other forms of hierarchy, but rather is one of the modes of
Master Shake
expression
going in.
of other modes of hierarchy. So what is being shored up when the settler bureaucrat or the settler newspaper says,
Nicely done, Master Shake. Nicely
this kind of body and life don't belong in rural Wisconsin or in rural Montana. They might be thinkable in the city, but not there. What the claim, which is about cisness, is actually an alibi for the like erasure for genocide denial, and also it is a claim about the whiteness of Americans, right? And this is a substantial a part of the process through which ethnicities are incorporated into whiteness, through the proffering that all of these people know how to do family correctly, and all of these people understand sex role and embodiment correctly from the mid-19th to the 20th century. So
anyone of any ethnicity can be white if they
the
believe in
idea
the
there is
family.
not that there's like that cisness encounters race or encounters class or encounters sort of the notion of like a ordained modernizing authority versus a sort of like backward religiosity or something, but
Yeah,
rather
finally we
that
can prove that
cisness
Nick
is the
one
mode of
doesn't fly you,
expression for
exactly.
the other credentials for bourgeois power. So yeah, okay, and then the nation has been central might also make in the US and Iran, for instance, then what analytics might also become visible in. So I think like one thing that becomes visible
Ooh, Sophie's in the
is
chat.
about
Hi,
the way
Sophie.
in which racialization can operate very differently given in different contexts, and that cisness just the proffering of the idea that the center of cultural authority understands how bodies work and understands them properly. So another example that is one of the pieces in the collection is about the importation of mostly American missionaries into post-colonial Korea of ideas about how to live, of sexual hygiene and gestation and so on, in a much later moment than the ones I talked about before. So, and of course, the sort of shape of colonial authority and racialization is very different there than it would be in the Midwestern United States or in Iran. So I think that's sort of the ways in which cisness allows for the exposure of different regimes of racial organization is one of those things. So.
Okay, brilliant. A lot of people are thanking you for your answers to the questions and also for your talks. And we have reached time, so I'd also like to thank you again for participating in the HM event. It's been wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to our audience. I hope everyone has a great evening and rest of their day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Sophie.
Okay, we're not live anymore. I'm so sorry. The chat.
No! We were so close! We were so close to a live mic! No! No! Oh, man, that would have made the whole presentation. Oh, damn! That was so close! Someone pulled the plug on the socialists. At least they didn't ban me for saying hi to Sophie. People are like, you're live. Okay. Yeah, they're absolutely talking about me right now. Yeah, they are. They 100% are. And listen, man, I didn't even do anything. In fact, if anything, I was just bitchy and pissed off the entire stream. I didn't even really make any comments. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't tell anyone to do anything. I was thinking very seriously about doing a who's chat, our chat at the end, but I was just so pissed off at the end. I was like, I don't even care. I don't even care. Sophie and friends have won this battle. I am worn the fuck out. I am worn the fuck out by retard conservatives. I am worn the fuck out. Like, I have no patience anymore. I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm just going to pontificate for a second because it's my stream and I've been holding it in all fucking stream. I was thinking about this earlier today that I am dying. I mean, dying to have intellectual conversations about the far left with anyone. I really and truly, I am dying for a fucking single intellectual conversation with almost anyone about the far left. But the problem is, the only people that I can actually even begin to have intellectual conversations with are specific members in my community that have been watching this stuff with me for years and that are really into it. And not everyone that's been watching me for years is totally into the leftist content. Like, there are people who watch me for years that don't even watch any of this stuff with us because they're like, oh, I just don't even care, Karlyn, whatever. They just like me for other reasons. I can't figure out why, but that's true. So there are people who watch my content but don't really get into the leftist stuff. I can't have intellectual conversations with them. It's just a very, very, very few people in my community that I know I can do that stuff with. And hang on. Sorry, coughing. Oh no. I've been constantly sick for like a month and a half and just cough at random moments still. Anyway, I am dying to have fucking intellectual conversations with people. I really am. I want to do a conference. I want to do a whole day-long discussion where all of us just actually have conversations and critique and actual conversations. I'm not talking about me talking to the chat. I'm talking about I want to have a Zoom call just like the Socialists just did and have like a serious intellectual panel discussion with people who understand this topic. The problem is that I literally don't know of anyone, and I'm not trying to be egotistical. I'm really not. I don't know of anyone who understands this topic even remotely closely to the way that I do, except for people who've been watching my content for a long time and have gotten really into it. I can have an intellectual conversation with Master Shake. I can have an intellectual conversation with Reagan. I can have an intellectual conversation with Mizakan. There are plenty of people that I can have intellectual conversations with in my community. Average person. Like, I shouldn't even name people, because if I start naming people, I'm going to forget people. So I apologize if I didn't name you. But I can absolutely have intellectual conversations with some people in my community. The vast majority of people on the internet have no fucking clue what they're talking about when it comes to this topic. And then every time I say that, because I'm actually looking, people think I'm being an egotistical, like, fucking nut job when I say I know more about this topic than anyone else. They're like, oh, Karlyn, you think that you know more than anyone? Yeah, I actually do. I actually do. But the reality is that I would shoot myself in the foot to find other people that understand the topic like I do, that can actually engage in an intellectual conversation about the topic. And maybe they don't need to be like all the level of me, but maybe could they be like 75% there? Am I asking too fucking much? But you know what? The thing is, I don't have that resource, and it drives me insane. Because listen, I'm pretty fucking smart, but like, I need someone to be able to bounce ideas off of. I need someone to be able to supplement my understanding. I need to have someone that I can actually have a fucking back and forth with and critique the topic and get an intelligent critique. Because the 99.999% of the critique I get on the internet is either you're fat, you're ugly, I don't like your hair, I don't like your tattoos, I don't like you're not a Christian, or some bullshit conservative who thinks they know what they're talking about because they watch libs of TikTok, but they have really no fucking idea. And then these people think that they are in a position to critique me about this topic when they don't understand basic 101 level information about the left. And you want me to have an intellectual conversation with them? I fucking can't. I cannot. And again, I'm not trying to sound egotistical here, but like, I have immersed myself in this content for fucking years to develop the knowledge base and the understanding that I have. I've immersed myself in this content almost every single day of my life, and I simply cannot take it anymore when conservatives say they don't even know what a woman is. Don't they know that this is biology? Didn't they ever take a science class? Why don't they move to Venezuela? Why are they using the tools of capitalism if they want to overthrow capitalism? This is boring. This is stupid. I don't understand this. Do they even understand each other? I don't think they understand each other. I mean, I have no evidence to that, but I don't think they understand each other. And this is stupid and this is boring. And why don't you just make sure to read? And it's like that is every day of my life. Every fucking day of my life. And it is driving me fuck off insane. And all I want to do, I actually take this topic extremely seriously. And all I want to do is have an intellectual conversation with someone about this topic The socialists won't talk to me. The communists won't talk to me because they don't want to be perceived as being in solidarity with me because they're all pissed off that I actually understand them. No one on the conservative right understands this topic like I do. No one is even fucking close to understanding this topic like I do. And again, I'm not even asking for 100%. I'm asking, can I talk to someone who understands what the left means when they say capitalism? Can I talk to someone who understands the ACT UP movement? Can I talk to someone who understands the bashback movement? Can I talk to someone who understands the real goal of queer Marxism? Can I talk to someone that's not obsessed with calling everything they don't like pedophilia? Can I talk to someone who goes beyond the explanation of these people are all narcissists? It's like, can I talk to someone who understands that the left is not funded by George fucking Soros? They're funded by mutual fucking aid. And I found myself like really being confronted with the fact on that stream that I am never going to be able to have these intellectual conversations because the only thing that I hear almost all day, every day are conservative retards who don't understand the basic information about the left. And they think that they can come and educate me and they think we're on the same level. No, we are not on the same level. We are not in the same fucking league. I'm sorry. Just because you watch libs of TikTok does not mean you understand the fucking left. Just because you watch clickbait on the fucking internet and you post memes and you talk about liberals being butthurt or whatever stupid fucking thing you're talking about, we are not in the same fucking universe. And it's like the left gets to have these conversations. The left gets to be intellectual about this, and this is why they're going to win. Because even if we disrupted their conversation, even if we pissed them off by saying whose chat, our chat at the end of the stream, like they still have a place where they can have a serious and honest exchange of ideas. And they have people they can talk to at their level. And it's like, man, and this is the part that will get me to quit. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is what will get me to quit. That I'm surrounded by people who think that they know more than me, but they actually know fucking nothing. And I don't have, it's mind boggling. It's mind boggling. So, yeah. And then it goes through my head, like, what more can I do to educate people? What more can I do? But it's also like, I was serious when I said at the beginning of the stream, when I was, kind of giving people a lecture, like, I was serious. I'm just pontificating right now. Like, I'm just talking because I feel like it. I talked about how, like, I have to teach people how to relearn things. I have to teach people how to behave in like an educational environment because it's like, again, I understand we're on YouTube. I understand that I do my streams a lot different than like anyone else. Basically, I don't know of anyone who streams in the way that I do in terms of trying. I'm trying to teach a fucking class. I'm trying to teach a live class on complicated content that everyone thinks they understand, but they really don't. And it's an open air classroom. And we've talked about this in like some of my community calls. It's an open air classroom. Anyone can walk into the classroom. I cannot control who walks into the classroom. I cannot control when people come in and they come into the classroom and they just start hurling shit at the wall because that's all they actually know how to do because the internet has trained them to be fucking retarded. It is almost an impossible fucking problem. The amount of misinformation that exists on this topic is almost an impossible fucking problem. Whatever, man. Whatever. Many conservatives act like they've never left high school. They're very immature. Yeah, that is extremely true. That is extremely true. And conservatives would say, like, what about the left? Well, just because the left behaves like retards, does that mean that you should be behaving like retards? Like, I feel like we learned a lot of these things. We learned a lot of these things, or how we should behave when we're in elementary school. It's like if you wouldn't walk, like literal kindergarteners understand that when you walk into a class, when they're all sitting on the fucking carpet and the teacher's reading a book or whatever the fuck they do in kindergarteners understand that if you walk into that situation and you start screaming and yelling, then that's not appropriate for the group. That's why they're all sitting quietly on the carpet, because at some point they've begun to understand this is the time to be quiet and sit on the fucking carpet and listen to the teacher. And if I start like screaming or shouting, I'm going to get in trouble. They teach this in fucking kindergarten, guys. Thanks, Donnie girl. I appreciate it. Or it's like if you're in the middle of the class and the teacher's giving a lecture or something, and you just like get up and all of a sudden start shouting, I disagree with you because I read an article on the internet one time that said this thing over here, that said this thing over here. And I just want to believe that because, you know, my uncle Johnny once said this, and it's like literally shut the fuck up. Like, first of all, why are you standing up in my classroom talking when I'm trying to teach you something important that you don't know? And it's like, again, people learned how to do this in elementary school. And then at some point, people forgot. They forgot that some types of behavior is appropriate for some environments and some types of behavior are appropriate for other environments. If you want to shitpost, go into like any other chat on YouTube. Go on to Twitter, go on to Facebook, go literally anywhere else on the internet. Literally anywhere else on the internet. I cannot fucking stand the shitposting because it is so beneath me and it is so beneath what we are trying to do here. And you know why I can't stand it? It's because it is constantly and perpetually rubbing salt in the womb that I cannot have an intellectual conversation with fucking anyone because no one understands this topic like I do. And it sucks. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish there were people that were smarter than me on this topic. I honestly do. Point me to someone that is smarter than me on this topic. I would love to talk to that person. I would love to sit down with that person and have a whole fucking series of intellectual conversations and say, hey, person that's smarter than me on this topic, can you teach me everything that you know? That is how I handle that. I am not intimidated by other people knowing more about a topic than I do if that's a topic I want to learn about. That's retarded. It is not possible to be an expert in every fucking topic in the fucking universe. So people think that I say, and I complain about like no one knowing as much as me. They think I say that because I'm trying to brag or I'm trying to hold myself up. I fucking wish there were people who knew more than me about this topic. I fucking wish every single time someone made fun of me or gave me shit for saying, like, you think you know more about this than everyone, point out someone who knows more than me, please. Please. Honestly. And even in like conversation outside of this topic, it is so difficult to find smart people on the internet who are willing to engage. It is so fucking difficult. And I don't know why it's this difficult. I really, really don't. Why is it so difficult to find smart people on the internet that are actually willing to come and have like a non-retard conversation? I'm not talking about debate bros. Debate bros are not having a conversation. Debate bros are playing some sort of fucking chess game where they're trying to checkmate their opponents. It's not interesting to watch. It's not intellectual. It's not an honest exchange of ideas. It's not even an honest like, hey, isn't this cool? And I like this because of this, or isn't this like let's do a deep dive into this thing that I'm really passionate about. I'm really excited. Like you just don't see this shit coming from smart people that are actually willing to engage, and it's just mind-boggling to me. So many people online. So many opportunities to have interesting conversations. And what are you just constantly hit with? The lowest of shit posting constantly. It's like, man, is this really humanity? Is this what I'm trying to save? Why? Like, honestly, why? Yeah, Chris says our society is 100% fucked. Our society is 100% fucked, Joe. We are so fucked. We are so fucked. It's not even funny how fucked we are. So, anyway. That exercise tried my patience today, and I don't know why my patience is so low with conservatives right now and with people who are just like not getting it right now. But it is incredibly low. It is incredibly low. Yeah, no one takes it seriously. And that's the most pathetic thing. That's the most pathetic thing. No one takes it seriously. Happening all right in front of us right now. Literally what that presentation was about was abolishing it was about it's all about all the basic stuff, right? It was saying that cisness upholds the patriarchy. Cisness is the thing that normalizes or naturalizes the idea of biological gender. We need to undo cisness so we can undo biological gender, so we can undo the nuclear family, so we can undo the social reproduction of capitalism, so we can build a new communist society to overthrow capitalism, yada yada yada, etc., etc. It was the same old fucking thing. I don't know how many people actually followed the language, but it was the same old fucking thing. Hey, thanks, Doug. I do appreciate it. I mean, do I even have enough people in this community? I'm asking a serious question now. Do I even have enough people in this community who understand this topic well enough to be and would be actually willing to participate in an intellectual conversation? I don't even know if that's true. I'm not saying me talking to the chat. I'm saying actually participating in an intellectual conversation. That's a fucking problem. That is actually a fucking problem. Of course, none of the people who claim to be intellectuals on the internet will talk to me. Even though none of them know as much as I do about this topic, I'm not suggesting that Brett Weinstein is anywhere fucking close to to my understanding of this topic, right? Brett Weinstein would never talk to me. I'm not a classical liberal. I'm not a Zionist. I'm not on his side. He might actually, Brett Weinstein may be one of the people that possibly I could actually get close to having an intellectual conversation with. And again, not that I think that Brett Weinstein understands the topic as well as I do, because I do not think he understands the topic as well as I do at all. But I do think on some level, Brett Weinstein is like actually has intellectual integrity, and I think he has a very intellectual mind. And I think that even if he doesn't know the topic as well as I do, he would be able to ask the right questions, and I feel like he would be someone who I could see understands how to intellectually explore a topic when they're learning about it in real time. No, I know for a fact that he wouldn't. No, I know we tried to engage with Brett Weinstein months ago and he ignored it. So no, like this is what I'm telling you. Brett Weinstein is a Zionist. He's part of that classical liberal bullshit online. He's part of that whole kind of like people who are pretending to be on the right but aren't really. They're not. He would never engage with me. He would never have a conversation with me. It would never happen. Because that's the politics of the internet. And that's just the way it goes. And that sucks. But I don't know of anyone else. I do not know of anyone else. What happened to Trevor Loudon? Someone asked that. I think that Trevor Loudon's put together a great set of resources. If Trevor Loudon really believes that Kamala Harris is a communist, I cannot. I fucking cannot. I fucking cannot. And he wrote a book about that. And I'm just like, I don't know how it's possible that Trevor Loudon has put together the resources that he has, and he does not understand that Kamala Harris is not a communist. Like, I don't. So that's what happened with that. Like, I just don't. Either he's just. I don't know how those two things go together. I don't get it. So anyone who thinks Kamala Harris is a communist is not at a level to where they can have a conversation with me about this topic, essentially. And that sucks, but that is the reality that we live in. So I don't think I'm going to do a stream at 5 p.m. because I just kind of want to not be around people, if I'm honest about it. And I just want to be able to focus on a project and to be able to do something actually intellectually stimulating to me rather than answering the same fuck off questions from retard conservatives for the 87th time this week because they didn't listen to the first 86 times I answered it and they didn't understand it and they didn't. It's just like, I can't. I'm taking the rest of the day and I'm doing stuff I want to do. And that's what it's going to be, I think. And I will be back tomorrow for happy hour. And that's it. That's it. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Would you give me some idea?
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.